When we look around us, we see a space with things in it and perhaps movement going on. We hear sounds. Uh, we experience the world through our senses. And there's a, there's a philosophical position called naive realism, which many people hold, and it has practical value most of the time. Naive realism says that our perception is accurate, that what we see is what's out there. It's kind of the idea that a flashlight is a flashlight because it looks like a flashlight. And uh, naive realism, if you push it very far, though, starts to break down. You know, our little sample of reality that we get through our senses is only a tiny, tiny sample of reality. We can't draw conclusions from that about the shape of the world or what the Earth is doing in relation to the sun, or even what's going on in spaces that are just a few hundred yards away from us in someone else's house. Um, Perception is limited. And yet, naive realism uh, sort of tells our mind that it is accurate and it's enough to go on. In a way, all of the arts and the sciences mount attacks from different directions on naive realism. And when I was starting out my teaching career, I used to develop kind of a nerdy, logical refutation of naive realism. You know, it would go along the lines of, well, if my perception is accurate and if your perception is accurate and everybody's perception is accurate, then we should all agree on what we see and what we say about the world as we sense it. But people don't agree, and that's a hint that naive realism isn't perhaps correct. Or I could take the approach of saying if my perception is always accurate, then it shouldn't change over time. But my way of seeing things and what is obvious to me keeps changing as I grow older and as I learn things. And so that's another hint that naive realism isn't correct. And a piece of advice that sums up that doubt about naive realism is the phrase, doubt your first impression. And interestingly, that's the tagline that in the nonviolence world we associate with step number one. In nonviolence training, there are steps for nonviolent problem solving. And step number one is information gathering. And the advice to doubt your first impression is a reason for why you need to gather information. You need to understand more about situations because first impressions or immediate perceptions are very often misleading, especially when it comes to social situations and to situations that are fraught with emotion. Um, and we can't trust that first impression implicitly. So that sort of logical or nerdy way of refuting naive realism gives you some reasons to doubt your first impression. But I think in the modern day, we take an approach that's a little more sophisticated and substantive because we appeal to the fact that people have cognitive biases. We, in any situation where we're perceiving a situation in front of us, we're coming to that with a history and with expectations and with emotional investments and ideological commitments and all kinds of things that influence our first impression of what is going on during a speech or during a conflict, in a meeting, or almost any other situation. And there are things like confirmation bias, things like survival bias, uh, things like our reliance on available sources of information. Uh, all of these things uh, render our perception of what is going on um, inaccurate in different ways. And this is another strong reason for needing the opinions and the perspectives of a diverse group of people in order to try to triangulate on the the reality of a situation and the range of options for interpretation and action that might be available to us. So doubt your first impression, because there's a lot to be gained by gathering more information, gathering additional perspectives, and respecting the fact that although our capacity for perceiving the world is wonderful, it is not complete, and it tends to be biased. And we need others, we need the perspective of others to really gain some perspective on what we're addressing.